Hey guys, this is Donnie, and since this is the last week of class where we're reviewing for the final, I am going to go through this practice final, which is almost identical to the final, and hopefully following through this with me and just watching as I implement this and kind of narrate my thought process. This should help you a lot during the final. So the first one says write a class player. There's no creativity involved there. We know that the syntax for that is class player begin end. And then the next three bullet points are all saying every player has a, every player has a, every player has a. So when you hear that type of verbiage in English, it really means there's a member variable. So every player has a number, which is an integer, translates to private int number, right? So again, there's no creativity involved here. This is telling you exactly what to do. Member variable should be private int number every time. So the next two lines are going to be private string name and private int rank. So far, there's really nothing to interpret here. It's telling you exactly what to do. This is just pattern memorization. Let's see, the string is the name. Put that first. Private string name, private int number, private int rank. Okay. And then the last bullet point here inside of the player class says write a constructor. Before I even look at the bottom bullet, I know what a constructor looks like in general. It's a method with no return type and the same name as the class. So this would be a copy of the default constructor. So I've already written my constructor, but let's see, what does it specify about the constructor? It says it takes three parameters to initialize the three member variables. This is very important because this is the most common pattern that you see in the constructor. It will mirror the number of member variables and it will initialize the member variables. In other words, I have three member variables, therefore I'll have three parameters here, which are the same exact parameters: string name, int number, int rank. So you can type those without even thinking. It's purely copying these as comma delimited parameters. And then these also are just setting the member variable to the parameter. This.name equals name. This.number equals number. This.rank equals rank. So this right here is probably the most important pattern of memorization that you need to do, because the most common form of usage in the constructor is just one at a time take the member variables, pass them as parameters, or pass the same number and the same type of parameters such that we can take those values and assign them as the initial values of the three member variables. So when we create a player, we're going to say, I'm going to create a player, and here's his name, and here's his or her name, his or her number, and his or her rank. And that's it. I will say that there's one thing that I believe I do on the final where I also say to write a print method. And so like if there's a thing that says every player can print its own information, it'll be something like that. In that case, I just want you to recognize the difference between can and has a. So has a implies a thing, and can implies an action, and of course an action is a method. And a print, so a print as an action doesn't seem like it's going to give you a value back. You don't want to say like int x equals print. So I'm gonna, I would assume that that would be a void method, something like this. Public void print. And then, in here, really, if it doesn't say anything other than provide a print method that can print all the values of the player, it's up to you how you implement this. You know, you could use something as simple as system console write line. You can say like player, and I'll follow by number. This that number. Actually, why am I doing two literals in a row? Player number is named this dot name with a rank of this dot rank plus, you know, I really don't care how you would do that. Let's see, did I do this wrong? Plus literal, plus this, plus literal, plus this, plus literal. This might just be a weird .NET fiddle thing. Go away red. Yeah, sometimes .NET fiddle takes, you have to cut and repaste the line of code to get the error to go away. I could test this out really quick if I wanted to. I could say, you know, player x equals new player. Let's see, name Donnie, number 1, rank 1, whatever. And I could say x.print. Just a quick test. So it says player number 1 is named Donnie with rank of 1. So we seem to be all good here. All right, so now we're going to do almost the same thing again, a different class, team. Here we go with the hasas again. So once again, you just copy and paste the names of the types and the names of the variables. So string name, player, array, players. Private string name, private player, array, players. So I want to once again say there's no creativity involved here. You have no choice but to write exactly what I just wrote, because I've specified the name of the variable, name, specified the name of the variable, players, I've specified the type of the variable, string, specified the type of the variable, player array. All right. The constructor says the same thing as the first one. Take the two parameters and initialize them. So copy the same exact pattern. Method with no return type and the same name of the class. So team, and no return type. And since it says take two parameters to initialize the two members, once again, we copy, no thinking involved, we just copy the types and names of the variables. So string name, player array of players. And again, in the implementation of the constructor, no thinking, just initialize them based on the parameter value. This.name equals name. This.players equals players. And you know, this is really, once again, this is really the only thing that we were going to learn in the last week, is that, you know, if you pass in a non primitive value to the constructor, there's really no difference. You're just passing in the reference to it. So if I say a team has players, and then in the constructor I pass in a parameter that says, well, here's your players, just in the same way that I say, okay, I'm going to take the name that you gave me and save that in my object, I'm going to say I'm going to take the players that you gave me and save that in my object. So I've been given a name and a list of players, and I now store those two things in my team. So now I can actually test it by saying team t equals new team. This is just a test. You don't have to do this, but so when you do the team constructor, you have no choice but to pass it a name and an array of players. So a name is no problem. We could just, you know, call it Donnie's team or whatever. But we do not have a list of players. So in order to do that, we would have to say player array players equals new player array. And let's just for simplicity's sake, let's just make it an array of size 1. So we can say players sub 0 equals, And of course we have to give it a player there. So new player, Donnie, 1 and 1. I don't care about the number in the rank at all. And then, so now the second parameter of team requires a player array, which we just created, players. And don't worry that I went through that fast because we're about to do it again, except slower. So I'm just testing my team class here. So this last part is going to be, oh, we're not done yet. We have one more method to write. Write a method print that loops through the player array. Actually, everything that I just did is almost similar to what this part says here, except it's a little longer. Write a method print that loops through the player array. All right, so first of all, I'm just going to write a method print. And once again, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that that's a void method because print doesn't sound like it's returning anything. Write a method print. What does it do? It loops through the player array. Okay. So right away, I know I'm going to be looping through the players. So you can use a for loop here or a for each loop. I'm going to choose a for each. So I'll say for each player p in this dot players. What do you want me to do? Display each player's name, number, and rank. Well, the nice thing is we already have a method that does that as part of the player. Oops, not layers, players. So I can actually just invoke the method p.print because I don't have public access. The only thing I have public access to on the player is print anyway. So I couldn't print these one at a time even if I tried since they're private. So that test that I just wrote a second ago, that's pretty much going to be the same thing that this is asking me to do down here. So hopefully there's nothing too surprising about these first 2 points of the 2 classes, other than, like I said, other than having our first member variable that's not a primitive, nothing really different going on here. So the thing is, before we read this, I just want you to acknowledge that a team consists of players. So we're going to need to create some players and throw them in an array before we can create a team, because a team requires an array of players. I showed that briefly a moment ago when I wrote my test, and that will be exemplified again right now. So moving on to the third and final bullet point, it says in the main program below, create 6 player objects. Once again, redundantly saying that we have to use the constructor that we specified. So 6 players. Easy enough. Player p1 equals new player. A little copy pasta. Actually, let's get the constructor right before we copy pasta. So the constructor is complaining that we need a string and 2 ints. Obviously, we've stated here that we need the name, the number, and the rank. So let's just give it any old, oh, the name is first. Any old name, so we'll just say player 1. And for simplicity's sake, we won't care. When you do this, you can obviously give it meaningful names and numbers, but for this example, as long as we provide it with a valid string name and, or sorry, a valid string and 2 valid integers, that should be fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I will just change the variable names. Oops. 1, 2, oops, I did 2 twice. 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These don't necessarily need to be different, but it'll help distinguish them. So there's our 6 players. Now it says create 2 player arrays of size 3. So the syntax for an array is if it's a player array, then we just specify the type. but it's an array, so we have to put that after it. We give it a name, so we'll say, since we're making two of them, we'll just call this one players 1. And then of course we need new type size, and the size is 3. So that should not be an error. And since we need two of them, I'll just go ahead and preemptively make the second one there. So we have these two arrays, each one can fit 3 players. That makes perfect sense because we have 6 players. So inside of each array, I'm simply going to populate it with 3 of the players. So players 1 sub 0 equals P1. That should be fine, right? And then I'm just going to copy pasta this there, and I'm going to copy pasta it there, and then make sure this is the first array, this one is the second array, players 2, players 2, players 2, and this is the second player, the third player, the fourth player, the fifth player, the sixth player, and then we want the positions of the array to always be the first, the second, and the third, because those are the only positions that are available in an array of size 3. 0, 1, and 2. So now we have two arrays, player 1 and players 1, players 2. They're both of size 3. They're both of type player array. That means each index is a player object. So here's where we created the player object. Here's a reference to it, and we use that reference to point players 0 to it. That's fine. If it's easier for you to not even have this variable P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, P6, you don't need them. You can actually instantiate the players right here if you prefer. There's no difference. Actually, I could argue that this method is a little better because you get rid of some redundant variables, but both of them are doing the same exact thing. Like we talked about, a balloon can have 2 strings tied to it, and it doesn't change the fact that there's only one balloon. So I'm getting rid of the redundant variables that we used to create them. That's totally fine if that's how you want to do it. It's definitely cleaner that way. We created 6 player objects. We created the two player arrays. We put the players inside of the arrays. And now we come to the conclusion. This is the kind of the pièce de résistance, the end of the main point of the program, which is create 2 teams and give the teams the parameters they require, which is the name of the team and the players on the team. And that's really, really easy. And now that we've kind of used this design, it's extremely easy. So to create 2 teams, we would just say team 1 equals the new team, and follow the definition of the constructor, which is, hey, I need a string, which is the name, and I need players. I need a list of players. So for the name, we can just make something up. Just say team 1. And the second parameter is an array of players. So as we can see right here, we already have 2 arrays of players, so we can pick anyone we want. We could simply pass it right there. And there we have it. And for team 2, we can do the same thing. Actually, copy pasta. So team 2, named team 2, and we'll give it the other array. So the first 3 players are accounted for in this array, the second 3 players are accounted for in that array, and finally all we have to do is print both teams. So that's it. That is the end. Player number 1 is so the only thing that's a little lacking here is the print method inside of the team. It doesn't really say, it doesn't really separate the 2 teams in the output. So let's go to the team print, and we'll just say system.console.writeLine, Here is the roster of team this dot name. See if that looks any better. And maybe just a plain old space at the end. That might look a little better. Yep. So here's the roster of team 1. Player 1 is named player 1 with a rank of 1, blah, 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 blah. You can see the rest. So that's it. That's really all there is to it. Hopefully the class definitions are very straightforward that you can see. And hopefully the main program you can see here is also pretty straightforward. It relies heavily on understanding of what we learned in the arrays chapter, and it relies heavily on understanding what we learned on in the classes and objects chapter. All that's left is really like deciding how you want to implement this. I guess I'm pretty happy with this. You can see a couple of ways you could reduce the amount of variables you have. I will just show you that you can do this, but you know this would be perfectly, let's say, done. Everything that this is asking you to do is done here. One thing that I'm thinking that I might do is there's a couple of shorthand ways of doing things. For instance, when you create an array of stuff, there's a shorthand way of doing this. Instead of saying sub 0 equals this, sub 1 equals that, sub 2 equals that, you can actually initialize it right off the bat by putting 2 brackets and a semicolon, and then a comma delimited list of the things inside of it. So that red error will go away once I put the 3 values comma delimited inside of it. So instead of one line at a time here, I could take those out and say that, comma that, comma that. So this would not change the program at all, but it would I don't know, I guess it's harder to read maybe, perhaps for some people, but it's shorter. Some people that want to have the best of both worlds might just like put like lines here, use the same syntax, but maybe a little different convention in the formatting. Oops. Like that, or maybe even like that. But since I can read it pretty easily, I would probably do it as one line. I'm not saying that you should or have to do this, but just while I'm here, when I see code that can look better, I like to show people. So, all right. So that brings that down to 2 lines. And then the other thing is this variable here only serves to be fed into the second parameter of the team. So in the same way, we can take this entire value and substitute that right there, since we're not using it anywhere else. And this value is not being used anywhere else except for right here where we're feeding it into the second team. So again, that can be treated as a redundant line of code. So yeah, that does shorten the main program quite a bit. Obviously, I wouldn't have written it like that right off the bat, probably, because I was trying to follow the instructions one at a time. But I think this is as far as I'm gonna go. So hopefully you don't have to spend too much time rewatching this video, and if you have any questions about it or clarifications, please ask on Blackboard during the week, or you can email me, and I will try and help you out the best I can. All right, thanks.